Why won't there be peace in the Middle East until Jesus comes? Occupying till He comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries.
Welcome, friends. This is Dane Rome, your announcer for today's Last Days Beacon program. Thank you for joining us again today. And just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with Bible prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You'll find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. Well, on today's program, Dr. Dave Schnitker will be interviewing Carol Rushton regarding her brand new article, The Arab-Israeli Conflict, Islam Changes Everything. The modern world has been embroiled in seeking peace in the Middle East between Jews and Arabs for almost 100 years. Conferences, summits, meetings, agreements, and treaties have all fallen by the wayside. No amount of time, blood, sweat, tears, begging, pleading, bullying, and threatening have achieved the elusive goal of peace between Arabs and Israelis. Why is that so? And how does the Islamic religion compound that problem? That's what this program will deal with. So let's join Dr. Schnitker and Carol Rushton for today's fascinating discussion.
Thank you, Dane. It is a great privilege to have Carol Rushton on the program both today and next week to discuss her brand new article entitled The Arab-Israeli Conflict, Part 2, Islam Changes Everything. This is actually the second in a three-part series of articles which comprises the Last Days Beacon series for March, April, and May of 2018. My friends, if you are not a subscriber to the Last Days Beacon or would like extra copies of this particular article, our announcer will share how to do that at the end of today's program. I've had the privilege of knowing and working with Carol for many years at a previous ministry. Carol is an accomplished author and broadcaster and had the privilege of living in Jerusalem for 8 years while working at the Jerusalem Post. Carol has been of great help in launching Southwest Prophecy Ministries, and I'm thrilled to have her writing and broadcasting for us once again. Carol, welcome to the program today.
Thank you so much, David. It's great to be here.
And our listeners may notice that we have a brand new set today, and I hope that it will improve the looks of what we're doing. Now, Carol, your last article traced the biblical roots of the conflict between Arabs and Jews, going all the way back to Isaac and Ishmael nearly 4,000 years ago. This conflict was complicated by the illegitimate sons of Lot, Moab, and Ben-Ammi. The conflict between Jacob and Esau's descendants also sharpened the historical conflict between Arabs and Jews. Well, today we move into the Christian era and talk about the influence of Islam among the Arab peoples and this conflict between the Jews and Arabs. First question for you, Carol. How did Muhammad's view of the Jews lead to conflict, particularly over the possession of Jerusalem?
Well, when Muhammad first started out preaching, he was born in 570 AD, and I think he started preaching when he was about 35, 40 years old, and he got this revelation that Allah was supposed to be the one God. Well, at first his message was very conciliatory towards Jews and Christians, but they didn't really accept his message. They didn't fight him, but they just didn't accept Islam. Jews had a background, of course, of Moses and the Torah and the Old Testament, and there was only one God. And then, of course, Christians had accepted Jesus Christ as the Messiah, the promised Messiah, So they weren't going to accept somebody named Allah as their God. Now, a little bit of background for those viewing the podcast. Muhammad, when he was born in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, what is now Saudi Arabia, but used to be called Arabia. Every city and town had their own special god that they would worship and pray to. The god of Mecca, the city of Mecca, just happened to be Allah, the moon god. And so that's the God that he adopted as being the one God over everyone.
So Muhammad did not invent the concept of Allah
No.
as the one supreme God. He borrowed it from other pagan
Yes.
religions.
Yes.
Okay.
And so because he was born in Mecca, and that's what Allah was the moon god and the god of the city of Mecca, I think it was just very convenient for him to choose that.
Okay.
And but he didn't really have a lot of followers, a lot of adherents. And it wasn't until he changed his message and it became a more violent message that he was able to gain power. And that's when he had enough followers that they would raid caravans, kill people, the booty, the plunder, whatever they had, they would share it between themselves. And so his message changed from one of being very open to Jews and Christians to saying, well, if they're not going to follow Islam, then it's permissible for you to chop their heads off.
Very persuasive.
Very persuasive. And that's very attractive. Now we can think of as Westerners that that's a rather brutal message, but you have to understand that we have a foundation of a Judeo-Christian heritage that considers murder as a crime, as a capital crime, worthy of death.
Right. Going all the way back to the covenant with Noah.
Yes, yes. And of course, and that's the thou shalt not murder is one of the Ten Commandments. So, but the Arabs, peoples, they did not have that kind of a foundation. They'd already rejected the God of the Bible. So I think it was very easy for them to accept something like this. There really aren't really a whole lot of moral foundations in Islam. Jews and Christians have a very solid moral foundation of behavior that they try to at least adhere to, that the standards that is set before them. So of course they're not going to accept anything like that. I think it was very appealing to the Arab people. And so he would, when he would go into a town or a city and they would raid the city, of course anybody who did not accept Islam, they would either kill or murder, or they would put under a very heavy tax. So if you didn't convert, they were going to convert you one way or another, by death or forcing you to convert. So that's part of the problem that arose from Islam. And there's just a lot of Jewish hatred there, and it magnified, I think, that the feelings that Arab peoples already had for the Jews, and to be honest, also for the Christians as well. And then, of course, when Islam was able to gain enough followers, then they were able to take over other cities as well. And I think about the 8th century AD is when they had enough followers to actually capture Jerusalem. And that's when the mosques on the Temple Mount were erected and built. The Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this is particularly, didn't make the Jews very, very happy. Now, again, Westerners don't understand that when a mosque is built on a piece of land, no matter what's been there, a synagogue or a church or anything else, it automatically becomes the property of Islam in perpetuity. So
any history prior to that then in effect becomes erased.
Right.
Or irrelevant.
It's very irrelevant. It's from now on, it's the property of Islam, and it's, if it's a mosque, it's always a mosque. This is what happened during at the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron. or Hebron. And Hebron is where the Cave of the Patriarchs is. That's where Abraham is buried, Abraham and Sarah, Jacob, Leah. So you have a lot of Jewish history there. When the Muslims were able to take over Hebron, they turned the Cave of the Patriarchs into a mosque. And they would not allow either Jews or Christians to worship. And they actually set a limit on how many steps they could go up to pray. And of course, the Muslims could go right into the Cave of the Patriarchs because that was now a mosque, so they could pray. But the Jews and Christians were banished.
And how ironic, because that's the only land that Abraham ever actually owned in the Promised Land. He bought that cave as a burial place for Sarah.
Right.
And of course, the other patriarchs were buried there also. So it's of great significance and importance to the Jewish people, of course, and Christians as well. But now it has been laid claim by the Muslims in perpetuity.
Yes. Now, what they did now that Israel has jurisdiction over Hebron, what they've done now is they've split it into two. Part of it, the Arabs can pray. There's a place for Arabs to pray. There's a place for Jews to pray. And about once every year or two, there'll be some incident. A Muslim will bring a knife and try to stab somebody, or is successful in stabbing somebody, and the police have to come in. And so these kinds of things still happen.
So it's not a peaceful sharing.
No, the Arabs never really accept anything like that.
Well, let's follow that up with some of the atrocities that the Muslims carried out against the Jews during the Middle Ages, following the establishment of Islamic faith in the 6th century. And as you say, they reached critical mass in the 8th century and began their plunder and conquest.
Yeah.
How did that play out, just in broad terms, during the Middle Ages against the Jews?
Well, even though Islam considers Jews and Christians as children of the book, of course, when Muhammad changed his message, then Islam changed. And we've already talked a little bit about that as well. For instance, we can talk about the Caliph of Baghdad. He made Jews identify themselves by wearing a yellow star on their clothes. Now, doesn't that sound familiar?
I think that's something, the precursor to the Third Reich.
Yes, the Nazis, I think, probably stole that.
Now, what was the purpose of that?
To identify them as Jews.
So they could be especially honored by the Islamists?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. It was supposed to be a Star of David, but it was yellow. And so that was a way for the Muslims to identify them and to do whatever they wanted to, I guess.
Okay, single them out for persecution or abuse.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you had, when Islam spread throughout the Middle East and then parts of North Africa, then any time that, again, Muslims would invade a town or a city, that's one of the first groups that was targeted. The Jews would be wiped out. They tried to do a very good job of that in Morocco. I think during the Middle Ages and other cities and towns as well. Of course, in Spain, they were really treated very badly. There was a Joseph Hanagid, who was the vizier of Granada, Spain, and of course, he was not going to convert, and neither of the other Jews were not going to convert. So they crucified him. A very nice way of dying. One of the most brutal ways of dying. And they crucified him, and they slaughtered about 5,000 of the Jewish inhabitants of the city, and they went on to slaughter Jews throughout Spain. So this is some of the things that happen when Muslims would try to take over a city, or actually were successful in taking over cities, towns in Arabia. And there was just usually a mass slaughter of Jews, and I think in one particular city or town, they were, if they left, they were forced into ghettos as well, and the survivors. And if they left, I think in one city they were made to wear straw for shoes or something. You know, it just was very, very the persecution and the outlandishness of the treatment of the Jews in their various cities and towns was just really outlandish and really over the top. But Muhammad really seemed to, despite his earlier messages, he really seemed to develop a real hatred for Jews and Christians, and who would not accept his message. And I think it's the fact that he could only become powerful when he changed his message to one of really brutal assault.
So he had to eliminate as much as he could the religion of the one true God so that he could substitute his pagan God and in fact command obedience or submission at the edge of the sword. And that was certainly a brutal period in Jewish history.
Yes, well, you have to remember that also during the Middle Ages you had the rise of the Mamluk Empire that was then replaced by the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire covered a wide area, but also ruled over the Holy Land as well. And they really did not care anything about the Holy Land. And you're talking about what is also called the Levant, which is Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. And that's one whole area. And they really allowed especially the parts of Israel to deteriorate. When Mark Twain visited Israel, well, pre-state Israel, the Holy Land, probably would have been called at that time. During the 1800s, he wrote about that in his book, Innocents Abroad. And he really, it was, I think, a big shock for him. Because, you know, you read the Bible stories and you have something completely different than when he actually saw it. It was he said it was a desolate place, very few people, probably some Bedouins running around, very few permanent inhabitants. It was a desolate wasteland, nothing would grow there, and mostly sand and desert, and just it was, he felt that it was just, who would want to live there? Who would want to be there? And that's the way he described the Holy Land. So the Arab peoples, for all their protestations that they should, the Jews have no right to that land, when they had the land, they could have had an opportunity to develop it and make it into a wonderful, beautiful place, but they had no interest in that. It's only since the Jews have returned that the land has blossomed. I mean, we see in scriptures that, you know, Isaiah prophesies that the land will bloom as a rose, or blossom as a rose, and there will be, Israel will fill the world with fruit and nuts and vegetables, and this is what is happening in Israel today. Since Israel and the Jews started coming back to the land, they have developed the land, and now I know that they're going to be Americans say, well, they're doing that with taxpayer money. Probably some of it, but they've also raised a lot of money themselves, and they've also had wealthy Jews around the world who have kicked in some money to help Israel and the Jews develop the land the way that it is becoming now. And they're actually, parts of it they're reclaiming desert areas. And so that the things that Israel's doing now is really a fulfillment of Bible prophecy.
It's
that
a
we
modern
can see.
miracle.
It is.
They took a desert and turned it into a paradise.
Yes.
Yes.
They're turning, and I mean, there's still parts of the desert that will probably always be of Israel that will always be desert, but then you have parts of Israel that they have been able to reclaim and are reclaiming. And it's just really fascinating. I know that one time when I had a trip to Israel, we were out in the middle of the desert, and all of a sudden there was a forest there, you know, right in the middle of the desert. So Israel, you can tell they love their land. They care about it, and they want it to be a wonderful place, and they want it to be a beautiful place, and they honestly care about it. The Arabs had it for hundreds of years, and they
did nothing with it.
They did nothing with it, and they didn't care about it.
Yeah. I think we've reached a good stopping point for today. Carol, thanks for joining me on today's program. We will continue this discussion on next week's program. as we continue to explore the Islamic aspect of the conflict between Arabs and Israelis. We've been talking today with Carol Rushton about her brand new and very timely article entitled The Arab-Israeli Conflict, Part 2. She wrote The Battle for Jerusalem some months ago. This is actually a three-part series of articles that is being published as our March, April, and May edition of the Last Days Beacons. And these articles collectively will give you a deep understanding of the seemingly irresolvable hatred many Arab peoples have toward the nation of Israel. And by the way, these articles will be incorporated in a brand new book that Carol is writing entitled Understanding the Middle East. Stay tuned for future information regarding this exciting new project. I'm sure, friends, that you will want to obtain multiple copies of the April Last Days Beacon article entitled The Arab-Israeli Conflict, Islam Changes Everything. And now our announcer, Dane Rome, will share how you may obtain this timely article.
Thank you, Dr. Schnitker. Dear friends, every month Southwest Prophecy Ministries produces an excellent article entitled The Last Days Beacon. These articles deal with a wide variety of subjects pertaining either to Bible prophecy or Christian liberty. Today's article is entitled The Arab-Israeli Conflict, Islam Changes Everything. We're offering a complimentary copy of this article to each one who requests it. Simply go to our website, www.swpm.us, and click on the Bookstore tab. Type Last Days Beacon in the Search tab and order your free copy of The Arab-Israeli Conflict, Islam Changes Everything. You may also order extra copies to share with family and friends. You may order 5 copies for $5, 25 copies for $15, or 100 copies for $60. When you order extra copies, you'll automatically be placed on our mailing list to receive the monthly mailing of the Last Days Beacon. Well, please join us next week for another Last Days Beacon program brought to you by Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Until then, this is Dane Rome saying thanks for listening.